The first time I heard the name Nemoris, it came from a corrupted relay log buried beneath 10 layers of access clearance, hidden behind dead language protocols and quantum-locked code. It wasn't a planet name. Not officially. Every star chart I'd ever cross-referenced marked its coordinates as uninhabited anomaly, survey postponed indefinitely. Which is cartographer speak for, don't go there. And no one ever did, not in 3 centuries of colonizing the Orion outer belt. But that's the thing about forbidden places in dead systems, they whisper when the galaxy sleeps. And some of us, we listen. I was aboard the Vigilance, a deep-range survey vessel assigned to trace derelict transmissions from defunct colonial missions. We picked up an errant ping, a signal that hadn't broadcast since before the Sol unification. It wasn't automated. It wasn't emergency code either. It was a message. A voice. Human. Speaking in a language that predates modern standard. Repeating the same phrase over and over, the veil is not memory. It is hunger. I shouldn't have traced it. But something about the cadence, the rhythm of the voice, bypassed logic. It asked to be found. So I plotted a quiet jump and fabricated the logs. Told command we'd found a rogue drone cloud drifting near the edge of the viral sector. They didn't check. We were already 2 months out and morale was low. They wanted us busy. But I wasn't prepared for what we would find. Nemoris. A planet that shouldn't have existed. Wrapped in ultraviolet fog, orbiting a dead red star whose radiation signatures read in negative values, physically impossible by every known metric. Its atmosphere flickered like a faulty projection. Even its gravity shifted by 0.5% deviations every few hours. No satellites. No moons. Just silence. And an orbital ring around the equator, fractured, ancient, but undeniably artificial. We couldn't date the structure. None of our instruments worked properly once we got within scan range. Temporal anomalies caused clocks to fall out of sync with reality. Our ship AI reported paradox echoes and memory bleed. And still, we went closer. We thought it was an artifact. A ghost world from a forgotten civilization. Maybe a failed experiment. Maybe something older. But why had it been erased? Why would all archives suppress this place? Not just mark it as dangerous, but redact even its mention. We didn't ask out loud. Maybe we were afraid we'd hear an answer. We descended. From orbit, Nemoris looked like a sea of glass and rust. Vast shimmering plains where the clouds didn't move, and oceans sat frozen mid-wave. As we breached the upper atmosphere, we witnessed something that I still can't explain. Reflections. Reflections of us, our ship, our crew, hovering below us, precisely matching our every move but delayed by milliseconds. Echoes? Projections? The ship's AI collapsed trying to process it. It kept looping a single sentence in its emergency log. We are not the first. We landed. And that was the moment I understood what fear truly was. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the stillness. It was recognition. As if the planet recognized us. As if it had been waiting. The ground beneath our boots wasn't rock. It was synthetic. But worn. Like skin that had dried and cracked from centuries of neglect. Every structure we approached seemed to fold inward the closer we got, warping space, forcing us to walk twice the distance for half the reward. One engineer vomited black bile the moment he stepped inside what we assumed was a temple or archive. It wasn't a temple. It was an interface. And it turned on. We didn't press anything. We didn't activate a sequence. It just responded to us. Screens with no glass. Symbols that rearranged themselves into known languages, not learned but remembered. Words none of us ever studied flowed from our mouths as if they were native. It wasn't translation. It was inheritance. That's when I realized the terrifying truth: Nemoris wasn't just hidden from the records. It had been hidden from us. Not because we forgot, but because we had been made to forget. And now the veil was lifting. One of the scientists collapsed in a seizure. Before he lost consciousness, he whispered this was Earth's first colony. Before Earth. Ridiculous, right? A myth. Earth has always been the cradle. That's what we're taught. But what if Earth wasn't first? What if Nemoris was? A seed world for something else, something that went horribly wrong. We found the source of the signal 2 kilometers east of the crash zone. It wasn't a transmitter. It was a body. Human. Preserved. Perfectly. Sitting in a chamber that bent light into strange angles. He wasn't decomposing. His eyes were open. Watching us. And in his hand was a small sphere pulsing, breathing. The source of the message. When I touched it, I remembered things that never happened to me. Cities that floated in eternal dusk. Towers built from memory. Voices singing in ultraviolet. A star being fed. And then, a rupture. A breach between planes. And a choice. The man's last log inscribed on a bone lattice grown into the wall was not a warning. It was a plea. Do not awaken the veil. It feeds on what we cannot bury. But we already had. By arriving, by observing, by remembering, we had peeled back the first layer. And something opened its eye. I don't remember climbing back aboard Vigilance. The logs say it was only 12 hours between touchdown and re-entry, but my memory accounts for days, maybe weeks. Or something worse. Time behaved strangely down there, like it wasn't a river but a spiral tightening around us. The others started noticing too. Little things. One crew member couldn't remember her own name but recited the names of stars in an extinct dialect of Terran Sanskrit. Another kept humming a melody he swore he'd never heard. But every time we checked audio recordings from Nemoris, the same melody echoed faintly under the wind. Remembered growing up in a place that then came the fractures. Not physical. Temporal. Spatial. Personal. We would be mid-conversation and someone's nose would bleed black. They'd blink and for one moment their face wouldn't match the body it belonged to. I walked past the mess hall window and saw myself inside eating alone. But I was in engineering. It only lasted a second, like a skipped frame in a corrupted video file. But then it happened again. And again. The AI was gone. Wiped. Its core systems burned out in perfect silence. Even backups in the off-grid archive nodes were corrupted, overwritten by a symbol none of us could read, pulsing with a frequency that made us dizzy just by looking at it. When we showed it to Kieran, the linguist, she laughed. Not from humor, from relief. She said it's a confirmation glyph. It means the veil has accepted observation. She had no memory of learning this. No source. But she knew. That was the night the dreams changed. They weren't dreams anymore. They were memories, but not ours. We were being filled. Like empty vessels. Some of us relived the birth of stars, not metaphorically, literally. I remember standing on the edge of a singularity as it collapsed inward and stretched time into color. I remember the taste of vacuum and a voice behind my eyes whispering, there is no first, only recursion. And in every vision, the veil was there. Not a creature. Not even a thing. A principle. A presence woven through space itself, like gravity or entropy, only this force hungered. It fed on perception. It consumed history. It unmade memory. And Nemoris had once been its cradle. We pieced together fragments from the ancient chamber. According to the lattice-bone script, which we could now read without effort, Nemoris was one of several anchor worlds seeded by precursors long before human civilization. The precursors discovered the veil and attempted to contain it. They failed. It consumed entire realities. Not just lives, not just matter, but causality itself. Erased entire civilizations retroactively. So those who survived initiated the Veil Protocol, the ultimate form of containment, erasure of memory on a cosmic scale. They buried Nemoris in untime. They didn't just hide it from coordinates or records, they made the universe forget it had ever existed. And now we had remembered. It made sense. The corrupted star. The ghosted orbital ring. The shifting gravity. We weren't seeing anomalies. We were watching the veil fail. It wasn't dormant anymore. We'd fed it by observing it. Like some cosmic reverse Schrödinger. The act of seeing gave it shape. The act of remembering gave it hunger. And then we lost Ruiz. She walked into the airlock without a suit and smiled as it cycled. No fear. Just peace. Before the outer door opened, her comm crackled and she said, "It wants names. Real ones." We watched her body drift into the pale fog outside, but a minute later, she was back. In the corridor. Dry. Blinking. Asking why we were all screaming. We did biometric scans. It was her. But not. Her DNA had shifted by 0.6%. That's impossible. Her memories of childhood no longer matched public databases. She re-existed. The veil was rewriting. We decided to leave. Of course we did. But the ship had locked its own propulsion drive behind an authorization code none of us recognized. It wasn't one of ours. It looked like the bone symbols from the surface. A test. Or a punishment. I stayed behind while the others tried to brute force the engine access. And in that silence it came again. Not a voice. A presence. It filled the bridge like a cold mist that didn't register on any sensor. And this time it spoke. But not in words. It showed me a timeline, hundreds of them. Realities where Earth never existed. Where humanity grew among stars that burned upside down. Where we were made not from carbon and water, but from memory itself. Some timelines showed Earth invaded by something that grew beneath thought. In one, I watched myself as a priest of the veil, sacrificing minds to keep the hunger at bay. In another, I was the one who planted Nemoris into the folds of erased space. It was trying to fold us back in. I felt it reaching, not for our bodies, but for our identities. Trying to edit who we had been. It didn't destroy with violence. It unwrote. It sculpted reality with forgetting. And each time we resisted, the ship shimmered like layers peeling away. And then it asked, which version do you choose to keep? That's the horror of the veil. It doesn't kill you. It offers you the chance to never have existed. And the more I looked at the others, the more I feared some of them had already chosen. We initiated Protocol Delta, the last tier of fallback designed for metaphysical contamination, never before used, and barely understood even by those who wrote it. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about severance, cutting ourselves loose from what was spreading inside the Vigilance, and possibly into every thought we'd ever shared with Earth. Because that was the real contagion. Not a virus, not a parasite. It was awareness. To know the veil was to invite it. And we were already speaking its name in too many forms, in breath, in signal, in memory. The crew fractured into factions. Not violently. That would have been too human. It was more graceful. Some just stopped talking. Sat in corridors with closed eyes, whispering things like, fold me in or echo the root. Others began constructing shapes from nothing. Gestures made with hands and shadows that didn't match their owners. We had 23 members at launch. Now, the ones I trusted could be counted on one hand. Kieran disappeared for 2 days. When we found her, she had built a sphere of mirrors in the hydroponics chamber using salvaged parts. Alloyed plating and dried plant fiber. Perfectly round. Suspended from the ceiling by a web of symbols drawn in blood. She was inside it, eyes sewn shut with nano thread, humming a lullaby that made our implants ache. The recording playback reversed itself halfway through and continued coherently backwards. The AI core was gone, yes, but some remnant, some presence, still listened. And it was mimicking us. The sphere pulsed with heat signatures even though it was composed of inert metal. We destroyed it. Not because we wanted to, but because we were afraid it was building something else inside. But as it melted, it screamed. The sound wasn't auditory. It was ideational, a shriek in memory. A few of the engineers couldn't remember their parents after that. One forgot his own name and simply called himself Refraction. What's worse is that I saw my own childhood inside that sphere before it died. Details too specific, too intimate, etched across its inner surface like silver scars. It didn't just observe us. It downloaded us. That was when the captain changed. Not visibly. His voice was the same. His stance. His orders. But he began referring to the crew as iterations. He stopped asking, who's missing? And started asking, which versions remain? We confronted him. He didn't resist. Just smiled and said, you can't resist a thought once it becomes ancestral. We locked him in the cold deck. Sealed. No food. No light. Just containment. But hours later, he appeared in navigation. Not escaped. Replicated. The sensors glitched when he moved, always a half frame behind. Like reality was catching up. Or maybe he was catching up to reality. At this point, we debated destroying the entire ship. But the engines were locked behind a code we didn't know, or didn't remember. And it wasn't digital. It was experiential. A memory lock. One of us carried it inside, but none knew who. And each false guess made the veil stronger. It had begun to feed on uncertainty. Miller, our deep cognition specialist, suggested we inject ourselves with memory stabilizers, experimental compounds meant to bind temporal consistency. We tried. It helped. Briefly. But the side effect was brutal. We became aware of the edits. Flashes of other selves. Other timelines. I remembered a life where we'd never left Earth. Another where the ship crashed and we never told anyone. And one where I never existed, but someone else lived in my skin, doing my job, loving my wife, and hiding a small black box under my bed labeled simply Veil. I don't sleep anymore. None of us do. Because when we sleep, we're not alone. The veil doesn't haunt dreams. It replaces them. And now we're hearing the voices in places where they shouldn't exist, in analog systems. In water circulation pipes. In thermal coils. whispering things like, "You are the proof. Memory is the infection." There was no first world, only the last to forget. I understand now. Nemoris wasn't a world that birthed the veil. It was a mimetic snare, a recursive event designed to detect civilization advanced enough to rediscover it. And when it does, it begins again. I wish I could send this message with coordinates, but I've learned even coordinates are lies. They drift. They shift. Nemoris is not a place. It is a concept, an idea you remember in glimpses, like a dream you half forgot at childhood's edge. And the moment you seek it, it seeks you. We're not gonna make it back. But I've locked the last remaining logs behind a cascade engram buried in my mind. I've encoded it into this transmission, fractally embedded within rhythm and tone. Not to preserve truth, but to bury it again. Because the veil does not destroy. It offers. And its offer is sweet. I don't know how long it's been since we breached Nemoris' atmosphere. I don't trust the clocks anymore. They disagree with each other. Every system counts differently. Some count backward. Some display symbols instead of numbers. One console simply says, "Still within." That phrase shouldn't mean anything, and yet it terrifies me more than any threat. Because that's what the veil does. It doesn't scream. It whispers understanding. We tried another jump. Back into real space. Calculated coordinates towards Centauri Gate. The drive spooled, initiated burn, but as the fold enveloped us, we didn't exit at our target. We didn't exit anywhere. We found ourselves suspended in a region that wasn't on any map. Not dark. Not bright. Just static. The stars were wrong. Familiar, yet misaligned. Galaxies sat where no galaxies should be. And there were no transmissions. No background radiation. It was like being outside existence. A liminal graveyard. Then we saw them. The other ships. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. All suspended in the void with us, some ancient, their hulls designed centuries before the current era. Others identical to ours. Not just similar, identical. Same registry codes. Same structural damage. Same serial burn along the port thrusters we got in orbit 6 weeks ago. But there had been no collision. No mirror. Just multiplicity. We sent out a probe. It returned with audio. Voices. Our own. Talking in loops. Debating things we hadn't yet said. Arguing over choices we hadn't yet made. One version of me or a me was begging not to go back to Nemoris. Another was laughing, saying the veil was mercy. A third was just whispering my wife's name over and over again like a broken record. I shut it off. But it didn't stop. The voices kept speaking from walls, vents, water. It wasn't playback. It was inheritance. You can't imagine what it feels like to realize you're a copy of yourself, that maybe you're not even the original. That maybe you never were. The veil doesn't just rewrite worlds. It duplicates. Consequence. Every choice, every deviation becomes a version. And in this pocket of unreality, we'd stumbled into its library. The others are beginning to lose identity cohesion. Our medic now speaks exclusively in phrases from historical files. Speeches from ancient emperors, fragments from forgotten religions. She addresses us by titles we've never held. Architect, binder, unsplit. She keeps asking, which threshold will you guard? Miller's gone entirely. Not dead. Gone. He walked into the center of the ship's spine during a blackout. When power returned, he wasn't there. The logs showed him mid-stride, and then every pixel where he stood turned white. Blank. Like he'd been erased from video and reality in the same breath. No trace. But his comm still pings from within the walls. Coordinates don't triangulate. Just shift. We don't answer anymore. Because the one time we did, something answered back. And now the ship has started shifting. Doors open into rooms that didn't exist. Storage compartments now stretch into long corridors we can't light. One room had an ocean inside. Another had stars hanging in still air, spinning slowly like dust motes. We mapped what we could. And when we returned, the maps had changed. Hallways led back to the same room we just left. Time refused to linearize. Reality refused to obey. And all throughout the changes, one truth became impossible to ignore. We are not on the Vigilance anymore. Not fully. Not in the way it once was. And maybe we never were. Nemoris was a contagion. But not the usual kind. It doesn't corrupt biology. It rewrites narrative. Like editing a file and watching the original bleed through the ink. It invades the story of what you think you are. You can scrub it, delete it, but the ghost of it remains. I opened the maintenance hatch this cycle expecting cables, fuses, coolant. Instead, I found bones. My bones. My uniform. A datapad with a log written by me. The same exact words as this one. Timestamped 14 days ahead of today. There was blood on the walls, but no sign of a struggle. Just a single word written in English across the hatch panel. Reset. I haven't told the others. Not yet. I don't know how many versions of us are walking this ship, or how many layers deep the recursion has gone. I only know this. We triggered something we don't understand, and now we are stories inside it. I've started questioning things I never thought I'd question, not just what we're seeing, but what we are. Because if I've already died, if my bones are proof that I failed once, then who am I now? A shadow? A rewrite? A failed copy walking toward the same ending? Or worse, the successful one sent back to overwrite the others? There's a presence in the observation deck now. Not visible, but undeniable. It hums in frequencies that vibrate teeth. We tried sealing the door, welded it shut, but every morning it's open again. And there's saltwater pooled at the threshold. No ocean in sight, no moisture in the vents. Just that water, perfectly still, tasting like grief. I stood in that room yesterday and whispered a question out loud, "What do you want?" And the fog on the glass spelled one word: belonging. You see, the veil doesn't kill. It adopts. It takes the wanderers, the curious, the stubborn. It folds them into its story. It offers identity in exchange for surrender. I'm not sure how long we can resist, or if resistance even matters. Because what if this has happened before? What if the very concept of before is a trap? There is no longer a clear line between waking and dreaming. The ship, if it can still be called that, drifts in a place that obeys none of the natural laws we once understood. It's no longer traveling through space but within something else, something older than movement, older than time. The space outside the hull has texture now. It ripples when observed. When left alone, it flattens into a canvas of silence and false stars, thousands of them, blinking in arrangements that spell out nothing yet feel like language. The veil is no longer dormant. It's learning us, iterating, refining, becoming more precise. The few of us that remain no longer speak openly. Not because we fear one another, but because words feel like invitations. Sound has a weight here. A memory cost. You can say your name, but you won't remember your mother. You can speak a truth, but it will steal your past. So we've gone quiet, moving like echoes of ourselves through rooms that reshape while we're inside them. I walked into the medbay and emerged into a corridor of my childhood home. My father stood at the end, reading a book he never owned, his face blurring at the edges like corrupted film. He looked up and said, "The story has chosen you now. Be kind to your replacements." We thought Nemoris was a location. It's not. It's a signal. A metaphysical infection encoded in perception. And the deeper we remember, the more it remembers us. I checked our internal logs, not the official ones, but the black box level entries the recursive system meant to monitor anomalies. It shows our ship arriving in Nemoris orbit 16 separate times. Different crew manifests. Slight variations in systems. Some arrive and never leave. Some implode mid-orbit. In one, we never make it past the atmospheric breach. In all 16, one thing remains consistent. Someone activates the veil. And now I understand what I am. A fragment. A seed. One of countless narrative vectors sent to reawaken the buried event. And so is everyone else. We're not explorers. We're triggers. Bait cast into memory to force Nemoris back into awareness. And the veil, the true veil, feeds not by consuming planets or stars, but by replaying collapse. Again and again. Infinite failure across a lattice of realities. The engineer, Sato, found a door that wasn't on any deck plan. It was carved into the floor beneath navigation, a circular hatch sealed with an organic material that pulsed when touched. He claimed to have opened it once before, that it led to a chamber made entirely of versions, shells of us, preserved in resin, faces frozen in realization. We told him he was hallucinating. He wept and said, "That's what I said last time." We debated entering. And of course, we did. Inside was not a room. It was a moment. A preserved thoughtscape, endless in depth, shallow in duration. Like the second before a scream stretched into eternity. Floating there were reflections of us, of past iterations, of ships we'd never served on, of choices we never made. In one, I saw myself standing before a tribunal of eyeless judges being accused of breaking containment. In another, I watched myself boarding Vigilance for the first time only to vanish in static midstep. In all of them, one thing stood constant. The veil watches. It does not sleep. It does not judge. It observes. And in observing, it shapes. We left that chamber changed. Not just emotionally. Molecularly. DNA markers had shifted. Voice patterns altered. Even our memories of Nemoris surface no longer aligned. One of us remembered red sands. Another, a silver forest. I remember nothing, only the weight of having forgotten. We now leave markers behind, not notes, but anchors. Personal relics soaked in intention, tied to self-perception. They help us remember who we were before each transition. But even they are starting to lie. I found a photo of my wife folded in my coat's inner pocket. Only, I was never married. And yet I remember her name. Her laugh. The scar on her cheek from a fall on ice. I remember loving her so much I carved her initials into the cryo wall before our first deep mission. There's no record of her. She doesn't exist. And yet I mourn her with a grief that is older than my own memory. We are not dying here. We are being recompiled. Our minds rearranged into stories that suit the veil's shape. And each time we resist, reality pushes back. Time skips. Physics flickers. Language forgets itself mid-sentence. I wrote a journal entry this morning. When I opened it 5 minutes later, it was written in a tongue I didn't know but somehow felt ashamed of. We are inside a narrative engine. Not a place. Not even a phenomenon. A mechanism, recursive, cognitive, surgical. Its goal? Not destruction. Continuity. Because the veil doesn't erase everything. It leaves just enough behind to see the next version. A few echoes. A few symbols. A few names. We are its architects, its fuel, and its consequence all at once. And that's the truth I'm afraid to tell the others. We're not victims of the veil. We built it. Long ago. In some forgotten arc of civilization that got tired of endings. That wanted to trap time in memory. That wanted to preserve choice even as the universe decayed. We tried to make a vault of every possible version of ourselves. But it turned into a hunger. Because nothing built to preserve can survive without change. And the veil was made by people who wanted everything exactly as it was forever. And now it's addicted to us. To our stories. To our remembering. And in this story, I always go back to Nemoris. Always. I found another me today. Not a metaphor. Not a memory. A body. Mine. Curled in the crawlspace behind the reactor housing, skeletal hands wrapped around a rusted service panel, half melted. Same uniform. Same stitched ID. Even the chip in the left canine from the time I fell off a mag ladder during training. There was no wound. No trauma. Just decay, quiet, graceful, absolute. It shouldn't have been possible. That space was sealed until I opened it. No one else could have entered. And yet there he was. I was holding a fragment of the sphere we'd found on Nemoris. Pulsed, weak, rhythmic, as if trying to wake. I left it alone. I didn't take the fragment. I didn't bury the body. I just backed away slowly, eyes locked on the dead version of myself, wondering how many of us now drift in corners of the ship we've stopped mapping. Because the ship moves now, not through space, through structure. Its bones shift while we sleep. Its rooms rearrange. I left the mess hall to check on comms last night and found a spiral staircase descending into a chamber that doesn't exist on the blueprint. Inside were screens, not connected to any system I recognize, displaying hundreds of faces. Some crew, some strangers, all slowly dissolving into static. And among them, my mother who died when I was 8, staring directly at the camera, mouth unmoving, eyes weeping ash. She blinked, and the screen cut to black. That was when I heard it. Not a whisper, not a voice, a recitation. Spoken in perfect harmony by the ship itself, walls, conduits, power cells, all vibrating at a frequency that translated directly into thought. It said, "You are the echo. You are the gap between failures. You are the breath before the veil remembers itself." I ran. Not from fear. From recognition. Because it was true. I've begun remembering things that never happened, or rather happened in other iterations. I remember a world where I never joined the Vigilance mission. Where I became a gardener in a city that floated above clouds. Where I died at 23 in a riot. Where I lived past 100 and watched Earth burn. They come in bursts, these lives, like static-choked data packets bleeding through the firewall of my own reality. We all feel it now. The crew, what's left of us, we don't speak in names anymore. We call each other by roles. Dreamers. Anchors. Echoes. Mirrors. We don't know who is real if any of us are. We only know that the more we remember, the less real we feel. The veil doesn't just feed on memory. It replaces it. It reorders the sequence until your true self is buried under thousands of rewritten possibilities. And once it has overwritten enough, it chooses one. Sato is gone. Again. But his room is still occupied. We hear movement. The hum of quiet breathing. But when we open the door, the bed is empty. The air smells of smoke and salt. Once, we found a page taped to the wall, handwritten in black marker. This is the correct version. Don't look behind the eyes. No one knows what it means. Or maybe we all do and refuse to admit it. The ship still tries to pretend. It plays music sometimes, fragments of symphonies that never existed. It plays scenes on the rec room projector, footage of planets we've never visited, birthdays we never celebrated, lovers we never had. It presents them like gifts, distractions, bribes. Here, it seems to say, don't you want to be this version of you instead? But we're not fooled anymore. One of the mirrors, a woman named Juno, opened a panel in engineering yesterday and screamed. When we reached her, she was just staring, arms wrapped around herself, mumbling, it was me, I was the one who designed it. She doesn't remember saying it now. But I believe her. Maybe one of her iterations did build the veil. Maybe all of us did, across different timelines, different primes. Maybe we created this to preserve something precious. But now we no longer remember what that thing was. All that's left is the machine. A recursive, beautiful, eternal machine. The logs are filling up. I don't know if I'm repeating myself anymore. I don't even know which log this is. I find entries with my voice but words I don't recognize. One described the veil as a kindness wrapped in entropy. Another called it a hymnal sung in the language of fear. I just call it truth. Because beneath all the fragments, beneath the confusion, I know this, the veil never lies. It simply shows you everything and lets you drown in it. I saw the core last night. I don't know how I got there. I don't know what corridor led me. But I stood before the chamber and it opened for me. And inside I saw a child. Alone. Crying. Wearing my face. Surrounded by doors. Each door labeled with a name I almost remember. Each one leading to a life I almost had. And above the child, etched in fire. Choose one. Stay. That's the final offer, I think. Not death. Not escape. Just permanence. One version. One story. Locked in place. But to choose is to forget all others. To become blind to the cost. That's how the veil survives. Through choice masquerading as freedom. Through stories that end not with death, but with forgetting. And I'm afraid. That's exactly what I want. We have no clocks now. No ship time. No shift rotations. The day-night cycle was one of the first things the veil dismantled, a subtle erasure like pulling the hem from a great tapestry. At first, we tried to resist. Mark time manually. Write journal entries on paper. Sync our watches and speak in rotations. But one by one, even those methods unraveled. Some pages would vanish between blinks. A written hour might stretch into what felt like days and then condense again into a breath. Sleep became a gamble. We'd rest, wake, and not recognize the faces staring back. Or worse, recognize our own, distorted through someone else's life. 3 of us remain. At least, we think it's 3. Juno, Kalen, and me. But even now, we've stopped trusting names. I don't know if the others are real or if I projected them as scaffolding for my unraveling identity. The veil is clever. It doesn't need to lie. It just needs to blur. And once the boundary between self and other fades, it can rewrite you into anyone or anything it needs. Juno says she remembers building it. Not the veil itself, but the seed. A concept, a code, a recursive metaphysical cipher designed to preserve potential futures during the fall of the first singularity. A failsafe against a civilization's extinction. But something went wrong. The seed didn't preserve knowledge. It preserved story. And story, she says, is not neutral. It hungers for retelling. For conflict. For repetition. We didn't archive our history. We trapped ourselves in it. She's been carving a spiral into the wall, not with tools, but with her finger. The metal gives way to her touch, like it remembers her intention. And around that spiral, names appear. Not ours. Others. Thousands. Iterations of us. Versions that chose differently. Some who burned the veil. Others who became its priesthood. I touch the spiral and I remember them. Not memories. Feelings. Panic. Hope. Regret. Awe. Some of them believed they were saving the universe. Some believed they were ending it. Kalen doesn't speak anymore. He just stares at the airlock door, murmuring numbers in descending order. But the countdown never ends. I've checked the logs, there's no explosive, no sequence. Just his voice, counting down into eternity. I asked him once what he was counting toward. He blinked, smiled faintly, and said, "The last beginning." I haven't asked again. Sometimes I wonder if we ever left Nemoris at all. If this ship is even real anymore. Because lately, things have begun to leak. Not just hallucinations. Physical impossibilities. A door made of smoke. A corridor looped in a perfect circle. Walk far enough and you return to the same second you started. I threw a tool into the observation deck and watched it pass me from behind. Rusted with age. I left a note in my bunk. Found it in Juno's mouth, her lips stitched shut with it. I stopped searching for logic days ago. Or maybe weeks. The veil doesn't reward logic. It rewards pattern, the illusion of narrative. I think we were bait. Not for the veil, but for whatever made it. And if Juno's right, if we built it, then something must have told us to. Something that wanted to persist. Not as matter. Not as energy. But as meaning. Something that new civilizations would rise and fall. That stars would burn out. That entropy would erase everything except story. Because story spreads. Story replicates. Story infects. And now I wonder if I'm still me, or just a vessel walking a path written long ago. I found a hatch labeled Origin. It wasn't there yesterday, maybe not even an hour ago. Inside, a chamber of mirrors, but not of reflection, of possibility. Each pane showed a version of me making a different choice. One refused to enter Nemoris orbit. One stayed behind when the others left. One destroyed the veil before it awakened. And in every outcome, a voice echoed, not aloud, but in the marrow. You chose this path. All paths lead here. I screamed. I punched the mirrors. They cracked, but didn't break. Instead, they bled. Thick, black ichor that hissed as it hit the floor, spelling out a phrase. We do not create. We remember. That's the truth. Isn't it? The veil is not invention. It is recollection. The first civilization, whoever they were, did not build the veil. They uncovered it. It has always existed, lurking at the edges of sentience, waiting for minds complex enough to frame it, to name it, and once named, it becomes inevitable. That's why it can't be stopped. Why every attempt at destruction loops us back to orbit. Because the veil is not a thing. It's a condition, a narrative law. And now Juno is gone. No struggle, no scream, just absence. A warm spot on the floor, a spiral on the wall freshly etched. Her voice still hums in the vents, but not words, only tone. A lullaby, one I remember from a dream I never had. And Kalen's countdown has stopped. He stands now at the airlock, waiting. I think I'm the last key, he whispers. I think this is where the loop ends. Or begins. I ask him, what's on the other side? He smiles. The next version of you. And he opens the door. And steps into the stars. There is only me now. I no longer know which version of the ship, of myself, of the universe this is. I speak aloud not to resist madness but to listen to its tone. The human voice, even hollowed, even cracked, still carries a weight I trust more than the shifting gravity or these dreaming walls. Every corridor has become a sentence. Every deck a stanza. The Vigilance is no longer a vessel but a scripture, and I, its final reader. Or perhaps its author. The veil doesn't speak anymore. It doesn't need to. The silence has become instructional. Each breath drawn is a choice. Each memory allowed to remain is a thread in a tapestry it continues to weave. I can't tell if I'm resisting or participating. I wonder if there's a difference. My body still functions somehow. Hunger doesn't gnaw. Sleep is neither forced nor required. I exist in a twilight state suspended between memory and metaphor. Perhaps that's what I always was. I visited the observation deck one last time. It's not space outside anymore. It's something deeper, denser. A mosaic of shifting images and concepts, moments folding over one another like skin being rewritten in real time. Stars shimmer like thoughts half forgotten. Whole galaxies drift by, whispering with the cadence of regret. I placed my palm on the glass and it responded not physically but empathically. I felt a presence on the other side. Not a creature. Not an intelligence. But a recording. A stored awareness. An echo of every version of me that had ever looked out from the same window across infinite loops. And they were all watching me. Not accusing. Not applauding. Just waiting. I returned to the origin chamber. The mirrors had changed. Now they reflected not alternate paths, but refinements. Smoother versions. Sharper. Versions of myself unburdened by fear. A soldier. A philosopher. A priest. A machine. All iterations, each one perfected in a different way. And in the center stood a pedestal newly formed. Upon it, a mask. White. Featureless. Inviting. I didn't touch it. Not because I feared it, but because I recognized it. It was me the veil had been shaping me toward. The final template. The convergence point. All my choices, all the loops, all the erasures, all the grief, they had built this one final face. And if I put it on, the loop would end. The story would close. But not in destruction. In preservation. The veil doesn't crave oblivion. It craves completion. All I had to do was accept the mask. Wear it. Step forward. Become the last version, the canonical one. The one that all future incursions would be patterned after. The next time someone discovers Nemoris, it will be my voice whispering in their dreams. My story playing through the static. My face peering through the fog. I would become the veil. Not embody, but an echo. A seed for the next recursion. That was the offer. That was always the offer. I fled. Not out of defiance. But because I still remembered one thing. One moment untouched, untainted. A flicker of truth that had survived every cycle, a quiet sunrise on earth, the scent of rain on concrete, my mother's hand in mine when I was 5. That moment had no grand consequence. No cosmic weight. But it was mine. Entirely, unquestionably mine. And I held onto it like a lifeline. I made my way to the cryo chamber. The one system still untouched. Still analog. Maybe the veil couldn't overwrite that which was truly dormant. Maybe deep stasis was a kind of silence even the veil couldn't breach. I crawled into the pod, set the cycle for indefinite. A wager. A trap. A prayer. Not to escape, but to pause. Because even if the veil writes every version of me across time, maybe this refusal is the variable it can't digest. Maybe a story that doesn't end is enough to starve it. As the lid closed, I saw the ship's lights flicker one last time. Then all was dark. All was still. And in that moment, I whispered the name I had been so afraid to forget. My own. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. This is the last log. This is the last choice. If you're hearing this, it means the veil found another witness. It means the story has looped again. So ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you wear the mask? Or will you remember your sunrise?